Hey guys, so another part here. Morgan, okay. The Morgans are the next family up out of that family of five that are secretly controlling the world. Um, More actually open about it at this point. Now, I'm going to play this quick intro, go through a couple articles. I'll put links to the articles, and then I have some video I would like to put up for you guys as well. Um, and I think what I'm going to do is probably once I get all five families up, then I'll edit it to put all of the families, all of the videos combined to one to make like a larger documentary type video. Okay, so here we go. Okay. So, as you saw there, um, the Morgans corrupt to the core as well. Morgans made their fortune in banking. Um, they were also involved in oil as well. Let's take a look here. Multinational banking, as this point, roughly $2.5 trillion, the world's second most valuable bank. Okay. Now going down. JPMorgan Chase, current structure. Let's take a look. Chemical Bank, manufacturer, First Chicago Bank, National Bank of Detroit, Texas Commerce Bank, Providian Financial, Great Western Bank, Bank of Manhattan. Chase Manhattan was formed 1955. Purchase of Chase National, which was established in 1877. Okay. The turn of the 19th century, obtaining bank charter required an act of state legislator. This course injected powerful element of politics into the process and invited what today we would be called corruption. Right there out in the open. But then was regarded as business as usual. Hamilton's political enemy and eventual murderer, he murdered Hamilton. Aaron Burr was able to create a bank by sneaking a clause into a charter for a company called Manhattan Company to provide clean water in New York City. The innocuous-looking clause allowed the company to invest surplus capital in any lawful enterprise within 6 months of the company's creation, and long before it had laid a single section of water pipe. The company owned a bank. The Bank of Manhattan Company, still in existence today, is JPMorgan Chase, the largest bank in the United States. Led by David Rockefeller in the 1970s and 80s, Chase Manhattan emerged as one of the largest, most prestigious banking concerns, with leadership positions in syndicated lending, treasury, securities, services, credit cards, mortgages. Moving on, chemical banking, JP Morgan and Company. Okay. And this just goes into, as you can see, these are more banks and corporations that they owned, still own today. This is a list of subsidiaries owned by JPMorgan Chase. Okay, take a look down. Makes a lot of sense, huh? Especially off those charts. See how much JPMorgan owns? It's insane. We got like nine pages there, I think. And they're all over. You know, they're not just in the U.S. Okay. J.J. Morgan, RMS Titanic, and SS United States. What does J.P. Morgan, the American financier, and the passenger ships RMS Titanic and SS United States have in common? Everyone knows that White Star Line, the owner of the RMS Titanic, was a British company. Few are aware that White Star was owned by an American. It was wholly owned subsidiary of the International Mercantile Marine Company, an American holding company owned by J.P. Morgan. Okay, and with all the information that's coming out now, I don't know if you guys have seen any of the documentaries or the new information coming out, where actually there's always been an idea that the Titanic was intentionally sunk. Actually, that the Titanic was switched, that they used the sister ship and they ended up painting it over. I can do a video on that if people end up wanting me to. Morgan Motor Company. Okay, and more on that, the creature of Jekyll Island. Jekyll Island duck hunt that created the Federal Reserve in October 1907. Several banking firms started with the Knickerbocker Trust Company of New York collapsed as depositors withdrew funds for fear of unwise investments and misuse of money. Lines of people waited in front of Knickerbocker to close their accounts. Days later, the Trust Company of America had droves of depositors removing their money. Then shortly thereafter, a run took place at the Lincoln Trust Company across the country. Apprehension that the panic would continue to spread occurred. In the fall of 1907, the United States was in recession. Banking system lacked a lender of resort mechanism, an intricate network of directorships, not dictatorships, loans, collateral, bonded, and fate of financial institutions altogether. But that's basically what ended up happening, is we ended up getting the Federal Reserve, which is dictating our government. Several banking leaders, including Jekyll Island Club members George F. Baker, president of the First National Bank, James Stillman, president of National City Bank, met with financier J. Pierpont Morgan, began examining assets of the troubled situation. A decision that was made to offer loans to any banks that were solvent. Secretary of Treasury, and it just keeps going on, but Theodore Roosevelt, they had a hunting trip, and that's basically ultimately became what we know as the Federal Reserve today. Take a look at that. It's very interesting. And then this is more on the creature of Jekyll Island. The Federal Reserve is incapable of accomplishing its stated objectives. It is a cartel operating against the public's interest. It's the supreme instrument of usury. It generates our most unfair tax. It encourages war. It destabilizes this economy and every other economy that it wants to. And then this is the violent, scandalous origins of JPMorgan Chase. Like I said, how he had killed Hamilton. There was gun battles out in the street, duels, and you know, because they were rich, it was just looked the other way. I'll leave the links.
everyone, I'm Crispin Huxley with Age of Liberty. I wanted to provide my first video here with some powerful content, so I thought there would be nothing better than to delve into a review of a great book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. This is a book written by G. Edward Griffin, who has been a powerful voice in exposing government corruption and for promoting individual liberty for many years. The Creature from Jekyll Island is a book that explains the secret, corrupt process in which the Federal Reserve of the United States was created. Not many people know too much about the Federal Reserve, but I can tell you that it is neither federal nor a reserve. Like the Affordable Care Act or the Patriot Act, its title has nothing to do with the true nature of its existence. It's in fact a private collective of central banks, a cartel, that has a monopoly on our monetary system. It has the power to control our political policies and the economic conditions we experience. In the preface to The Creature from Jekyll Island, Griffin explains that in his research he discovered that the true events behind the creation of the Federal Reserve veer far from the commonly accepted myths. The person who chooses to accept the reality we are experiencing, and heaven forbid, convey that message to someone else, will likely be suspected of tinfoil hat paranoia. Well, we're not going to back away from telling the truth, so we're going to go ahead and write off the naysayers as unfortunate sheeple of the establishment. You taking the time to watch this is great evidence of your willingness to learn and seek out truths instead of simply accepting everything that the establishment wants you to believe. So what is the Federal Reserve? We need to do a little bit of warming up to the concept of banking before we can dive right into the history of the Federal Reserve, because the Fed is a centralized banking system. Let's read through a hypothetical question and answer session that is included in The Creature from Jekyll Island that will put the concept of banking into perspective for you. This exercise was created in 1957, so the monetary figures will seem low, but you'll get the point. Most of us have bank accounts and are familiar with banks, but banking, or the banking system, is something that we don't often have a grasp of entirely. So let's ask the question. What are banks for?
To make money.
For the customers?
For the banks.
Why doesn't bank advertising mention this?
It would not be in good taste, but it is mentioned by implication in references to reserves of 249 million or thereabouts. This is the money that they have made.
Out of the customers?
I suppose so.
They also mention assets of $500 million or thereabouts. Have they made that too?
Not exactly. That is the money they use to make money.
I see. And they keep it in a safe somewhere?
Not at all. They lend it to customers.
Then they haven't got it?
No.
Then how is it assets?
They maintain that it would be if they got it back.
But they must have some money in a safe somewhere.
Yes, they do. Usually 500 million or thereabouts. This is called liabilities.
But if they've got it, how can they be liable for it?
Because it isn't theirs.
Then why do they have it?
It has been lent to them by customers.
You mean customers lend banks money?
In effect, they do. They put money into their accounts, so it is really lent to the banks.
And what do the banks do with it?
Lend it to other customers.
But you said that money they lent to other people was assets.
Yes.
Then assets and liabilities must be the same thing.
You can't really say that.
But you've just said it. If I put $100 in my account, the bank is liable to have to pay it back. So it's liabilities. But they go and lend it to someone else, and he is liable to have to pay it back. So it's assets. It's the same $100, isn't it?
Yes, but
then it cancels out. It means, doesn't it, that banks haven't really any money at all?
Theoretically.
Never mind theoretically. And if they haven't any money, where did they get their reserves of $249 million or thereabouts?
I told you, this is the money they have made.
How?
I told you, this is the money they have made.
How?
Well, when they lend your $100 to someone, they charge him interest.
How much?
It depends on the bank rate. Say 5.5%. That's their profit.
Why isn't it my profit? Isn't it my money?
It's the theory of banking practice that
When I lend them $100, why don't I charge them interest?
you do.
You don't say. How much?
It depends on the bank rate. Say 0.5%.
Grasping of me, rather?
That's only if you're not going to draw the money out again.
But of course I'm going to draw it out again. If I hadn't wanted to draw it out again, I could have buried it in the garden, couldn't I?
They wouldn't like you to draw it out again.
Why not? If I keep it there, you'll say it's liability. Wouldn't they be glad if I reduce their liabilities by removing it?
No, because if you remove it, they can't lend it to anyone else.
But if I wanted to remove it, they'd have to let me.
Certainly.
But suppose they've already lent it to another customer.
Then they'll let you have someone else's money.
But suppose he wants his too, and they've let me have it.
You're being purposely obtuse here.
I think I'm being acute. What if everyone wanted their money all at once?
It's the theory of banking practice that they would never do that.
So what banks bank on is not having to meet their commitments?
I wouldn't say that.
Naturally. Well, if there's nothing else you think you can tell me...
Quite so. Now you can go off and open a banking account.
Okay, just one last question.
Of course.
Wouldn't I do better to go off and open up a bank? Wow. Interesting stuff, huh? We learned that, like with many businesses, a bank is in the business of building a profit by collecting interest on your money. Nothing extraordinarily complex, but banks can run into trouble when customers have a run on the bank, or currency draining depletes the cash that the bank has on hand. These are a few problems that were addressed in the development of the Federal Reserve. The important thing to remember here before going into more detail is that the Federal Reserve is comprised of a cartel collective of banks. And as with most things involving human beings, those involved in setting up the Federal Reserve did so with the objective of benefiting and profiting for themselves. We'll dive down the rabbit hole of the Fed's insane history in the next video. If you'd like to get a head start, visit our store and pick up a copy of G. Edward Griffin's book for yourself. There's a link to it in the description. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again soon.
So as you guys can see there, the Federal Reserve is not a government entity. The Federal Reserve is a private bank that was established to basically put a chokehold on this country. And as I've shown in the earlier videos, the Federal Reserve basically tears apart any country that does not allow them to put a central bank in there. And now there's only 3 nations left in the entire world that do not have a central bank. And all of those other central banks are all tied to these same guys. They're all tied to the Rothschilds and Rockefellers and the Morgans. I got one more video for you guys.
There are a lot of factors connected with our drift away from constitutional principles. Among these, the most debilitating is our banking system, the Federal Reserve. Even though the Fed was created by an act of Congress in 1913, its operation and relationship with the U.S. government is amorphous, if not completely nebulous to the public. Some claim this is by design, for the Fed conveniently operates as a close partner when Congress needs to borrow yet more money, but an independent agency when it's convenient to insulate itself from political fallout, or its part in precipitating recessions. Thus, in 1913, Congress delegated its duty to manage the money supply to a bunch of elite New York bankers who formed formed a banking cartel now known as the Federal Reserve System. When the Federal Reserve System was planned in 1910, it was done so without the full knowledge and consent of the people. Born in secrecy on an island off the coast of Georgia, elite bankers of the time sought to establish a central bank that would mimic European banks and ultimately give them complete control over the nation's money.
The Federal Reserve is technically owned by the member banks, so we know who owns the Federal Reserve, the member banks. But who owns the member banks is very difficult, if not impossible, to find out, because the member banks are not registered with any government agency. They're not corporations. They have the basic structure of a partnership or something very private. It may even be something unique, but it's not on the public record. And the owners or the partners of these banks are not about to let it be known. Now, it's true that you can buy stock in Chase Manhattan and all that sort of thing. You can buy stock in the Bank of America, and as a stockholder you're listed. But the true control and ownership is not on the public record. And it's easy to hide that. You can use street names, you can use Swiss accounts, you can have corporations holding stock for other corporations which are holding stock for other corporations and that sort of thing. In general, it's possible to completely conceal the controlling interest of the banks from the public.
From 1913 to 1971, the elite Federal Reserve bankers managed to slowly decouple the nation's currency from the gold and silver backing required by the Constitution. In 1971, the Fed cartel finally got Richard M. Nixon to disconnect the last vestiges of gold from money on the pretense that the British and French were redeeming too many of their Federal Reserve notes for gold, something people and countries are supposed to do when Congress and bankers print up too many Federal Reserve notes.
But when you went off the gold standard, finally when we cut it loose in 1971 when I was in Nixon's White House, and the reason we went off the gold standard totally was that all these dollars that we had poured out in the United States had gone abroad, and the British were coming in with our dollars, demanding gold at $35 an ounce or $42 an ounce. They would have cleaned us out. So Nixon shut the gold window.
Now that the bond between gold and paper money has finally been broken, over the period of 1913 to 1971, the elite bankers print up as much fiat currency as Congress demands for all manner of welfare and warfare purposes.
Of course, anybody who likes big government, whether it's for the welfare state or for warfare, do not like the restraints of a gold standard, because then governments would have to pay for everything. They'd have to tax the people. And if the people were taxed today for all the welfare and all the warfare, all of it would end.
The relationship between fiat money and wars is direct and immediate. Wars at the scale that we know them in the modern world would simply not be possible, and they would not happen if it weren't possible for the nations who are waging those wars to raise the money from the population through the hidden tax called inflation. Inflation is caused by the Federal Reserve System through fiat money, the creation of money out of nothing. So, if it were not for fiat money, most of the wars that we've known in recent times simply would not have been fought on either side.
Ultimately, all the money that is used to stimulate, rescue, or bail out corporate entities that are too big to fail comes from the Federal Reserve System's power to create money out of thin air, also known as monetized debt, as more fully covered in the movie Fiat Empire. The 2008 Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, AIG, and $700 billion Wall Street bailout, root cause fiat money, not subprime lending, as Treasury Secretary Paulson claimed are only the most recent examples. Other bailouts in past decades have been Penn Central Railroad, 1970, Lockheed, 1970, New York City, 1975, Chrysler, 1978, Commonwealth Bank, 1972, First Pennsylvania Bank, 1979, Chicago Continental Bank, 1982, and the entire U.S. savings and loan system in the 1980s. The Federal Reserve System makes all this moral hazard possible. Even though the original intent of the founders was for Congress to be the most prominent branch of our government, today's congressmen are shirking this responsibility. They do this by improper delegation of their duties and responsibilities to outside agencies, committees, other branches of government, and even private entities. Why? So they can avoid blame for such things as bailouts and wars and stay in office as long as possible. To the degree they can get the courts or the president to decide on the tough issues, they can avoid making unpopular choices that could get them voted out. Money is the primary touchy issue because money represents the energy of the citizens.
So, some good information in those couple videos there. Just to recap a few things so far. So we can see a direct link from the Rothschild family, the Rockefeller family, the Morgans, to the central banks, the Federal Reserve, and the central banks abroad. And as you just heard there, how using this fiat money where they had intentionally stripped our gold, stole it from us. As you also had seen, that JPMorgan has one of the if not the largest gold reserve, pretty much in the world. In New York City, with tunnels linking underground to the New York Federal Reserve. So this is all direct. These guys are the ones that perpetrated these crimes on us, and they're still benefiting, 75 years later. And as you heard, we completely went off the gold standard in 1971. They started moving off of it in 1965. It's when they stopped minting coins in silver. And then it was completely removed in I think it was 1971 or 1972. And that's when, from that time going forward, you can actually see the inflation of the dollar. It's just, it goes insane. Actually, let me see if I can pull up a graph. Let's see. You can see here in 1930 you had 100% of your purchasing power with your currency, okay? Now the more that these dollars were made and printed and put in circulation, because there was nothing backing it, you can see this is the devaluation chart. You lost 95% of your purchasing power just in that short time. And here's an even more shocking one here, going all the way back to the 1800s. You can see pretty much how steady that dollar stayed all the way up, until you hit 1919 when the Federal Reserve was established, and then 1933 when the gold standard started to be taken away, and then 1976 and 1968 is when they started stopped minting the coins, and then it just shoots right up. If you haven't subscribed already, subscribe now. Give it a thumbs up if you like what I'm doing. Make sure to leave your comments and share. Much love, guys. God bless.